You've been videoing this. You can't be in the video.
Now it looks like a big old toy box. It kind of is a big old toy box. That's my toy box.
Monster truck.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys.
All right. So welcome everybody. So sort of some background on what this is we are doing a program with the Boys and Girls Club called Ignite, or the Believe and Build program, where basically we have a grant that is funding us doing a bunch of after school clubs, and as part of that grant, we're doing these shows every weekend as well. And so this is a show that is a special thanks to the Ignite program via the Boys and Girls Club. And what we're going to be talking about today is sort of some really basic entry-level physics. We're going to be talking about stuff that a guy named Isaac Newton sort of pioneered. I hesitate to say discovered, because a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about is going to be stuff that you guys have seen and are aware of, concepts that you guys have encountered. People of all ages have probably encountered, just didn't necessarily know what the science is behind it, or what the specific sort of sciencey name for it is. And so Isaac Newton is kind of famous for a couple things. You'll hear him talked about it in the context of gravity, but you'll also hear him talked about in the context of these laws of motion. So we're going to talk a little bit about the laws of motion here. It's kind of be sort of the main thing. And so Newton came up with 3 of these laws of motion. It's a really basic physics thing. First and foremost, objects in motion tend to stay in motion. Objects at rest tend to stay at rest, unless acted upon by some other object, or some other force. And so a great example of that sort of in action would be something like my rocket here. And so if I were to hold this rocket right here, it's not really moving. It's maybe wiggling a little bit because I'm not the most stable hand that the world has ever seen. But what's going to happen if I let go of this rocket? What do you think? If I just let go of it, where's it going to go?
It's gonna fall.
It's going to fall. Hey, predictions. We're seeing them. Hypotheses, because we're doing science. And so, where does it fall to? When we say something falls, where does it go? Down. I'm hearing some grumblings in the crowd. And so down is a fun concept. What is down? No.
Below you?
Below me. So let's talk about down for a second here. So I have here a globe, a model of the Earth, and I really like this globe that we have here. It's a very convenient globe. It doesn't have Bemidji on it, but it does have Grand Rapids for some reason. And so I can find out pretty much exactly where I am, because we're pretty close to Grand Rapids, and I can say we are right here on this globe. And when I drop a rocket here in Bemidji, it goes to the floor. It goes there. And I'll tell you a little something about myself. There was a while where I lived in a different country. I lived in a country called New Zealand, all the way on the other side of the world. Almost exactly the opposite side of the world as Bemidji. And when I dropped things in New Zealand, where do you think they went? So Bemidji's up here. I lived in Wellington, New Zealand, way down here. And when I dropped things in New Zealand, do you think they went, that way or that way or that way or that way? What do you think? Think stuff still fell to the floor when I dropped them in New Zealand?
Yes.
Yeah, they did. I didn't. We weren't walking around on our ceilings down there. And so when I talk about down, where is down? Yeah, it's the center of the Earth. And so down, in our context, is the center of the Earth. But down kind of changes depending on where you are. What direction is down can be kind of whatever. And so the Earth itself has a down as well. And so the Earth has something that it is sort of always falling towards, just like our rocket falls towards the center of the Earth. We're also kind of always falling towards something. What do we fall towards? What's the Earth? What's down for the Earth? Where is down? And we never actually fall towards it because we're moving in such a way that keeps us tethered to this thing, but never actually running into it. Happens a lot out in space. Do something called orbiting. And so the Earth orbits the sun. So for the Earth, down is the center of the sun. But because we're moving and we're orbiting rather than just falling straight towards it like our rocket is, we never actually hit the sun. We never actually hit down. So we're sort of perpetually always falling towards the sun, but we never actually hit it. And so one of the things that we can kind of think about as sort of a fun experiment is, I'm now doing a model here where the Earth is orbiting the sun. So in my model here, the sun would be, I guess, my my head or my hand, probably more specifically. The Earth is the globe, and that force of gravity that is holding the Earth to the sun would be represented by the string. So a question I always like to ask is, in this model that I've presented to you, what would happen if the sun, aka my hand, were to suddenly disappear? Where would the Earth go? Yeah. Then I hear a lot of answers for this a lot of times when I'm doing this. I hear a lot of people say it would stop. I hear a lot of people say that it would just like catapult off into space. I hear a lot of people just say like, oh, it's just gonna like freeze. Like it's gonna keep circling, but like temperature is just gonna change and it's gonna get dark. I hear that answer a lot. But I saw a hand gesture in the crowd this time that went, which is, let's see, let's try it. Let's get rid of my sun here. Well, you know, there it goes. And so it flies off in whatever direction it was when it was moving when the sun disappeared. And so that's what would happen with Earth as well, is it would catapult off into space whichever direction it was going, and it would keep going and going and going. And remember, we talked about Newton's first law of motion. Object in motion stays in motion, object at rest stays at rest until something either moves it or stop it. And so ours, for example, here, my model, can't see it on camera, but our audience can see, it stopped over there. Why did it stop? What made it stop? Well, it catapulted off that way because the sun disappeared, but it didn't just keep going forever, did it? Yeah, it stopped. And so it was an object in motion. It didn't stay in motion. So what's that mean is something stopped it, right? And so what stops it here on Earth? Things like gravity. Air resistance exists. So if you wiggle your hand around like that, you feel stuff. And if you're feeling stuff, that means stuff's there that you're bumping into. And so we have stuff in the air around us all the time. We move around it pretty freely, but like I said, if you move quick enough, you can kind of feel it on you as you're moving. And so there's stuff in the air that we're bumping into all the time, and my ball is bumping into all the time that's sort of stealing away energy from us. If you guys go upstairs and you do the harmonograph, this operates on basically the same ideas. Mostly air resistance and a force called friction that slows it down. You do a big push on the table, and eventually that push goes away. Like the table stops wiggling eventually because of all these forces that are slowing it down. Like I said, mostly friction and gravity. And air resistance. Air resistance is just friction, I guess. But then it hits the ground, and of course it encounters friction on the floor too, so it doesn't just hit the ground and keep sliding forever. It hits friction. And I want you guys to do something for me here. Can you guys take both your hands, go like that, and clap them together like that, and then rub them. And that heat you're feeling is a product of friction. And so friction wants stuff to stick together, it wants stuff to stay in place. And so what happens with friction is that in order to move stuff, you got to put energy into stuff. And so when you rub your hands together, you start feeling heat. And what that heat is a waste product. That heat is all the extra energy you put in beyond what you needed to break that bond, basically. And so if you just move it really slow, you don't really get the heat. But if you go really fast, you put lots of extra energy in it, you start feeling extra heat because, like I said, you're putting more energy into it. Energy. Heat is just energy. All right, let's do a little experiment here. We've established that when I drop a rocket, it goes towards the floor. It goes towards the center of the Earth. I'm going to try something else here. What would happen if I took this rocket and I put it on here and then I just tipped it sideways like that? Do we think it would still fall to the floor? I just pointed it towards the floor. I'm not gonna do the rockety part of it yet. I'm just tilting it. Does not fall. There's no like hand in there holding it on. You know, when I'm doing it like this, I can hold on to it. And here, I just slide it right on there, and you can feel that. Does it feel smooth? No. No tricks there. Feels just smooth plastic. But when I go here, all of a sudden it stays. And so what's that tell us about that bond? It tells us that the friction that's happening between this tube and this rocket is stronger than the force of gravity right here. And so if I want to break it, just like we had to do with our hands, I got to inject some extra energy into the situation to make it work. And so the way we do that with our rocket, again, a lot of fun physics here, is my rocket's got a couple pieces here, and disassemble it all. And so when I start out with my rocket, I can put it like here, and then I have an amount of air in this rocket that is the size of this tube. So this is hollow all the way from end to end. I have this much air in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and I'm going to slam it shut like that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this much air that's normally taking up this much space, same amount as what's in the air around us all the time, basically. And also I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to make this much air occupy that much space. And what's going to happen is, because all of a sudden my air is having to occupy a smaller amount of space, it's going to look for somewhere to escape to. It's going to try and equalize that pressure, and so it's got to find an easy exit. In this case, the easiest exit is probably going to be through that rocket, I imagine. Let's try it. All that physics happening, and if I do it right, there should be enough air pressure in there that's going to overcome the friction between that rocket and that tube that is going to then launch the rocket. So let's see. See if I can slide it in between the roof and the wall thing over there.
You're trying to get that?
No, that's fine. Nope. Hey, we got there. A little bit of a less direct route than we thought, but we got there. So yeah, like I said, air pressure. Enough air pressure to break those friction bonds that we were talking about. And so if you had the right instruments, you probably could feel on the inside of this, and you probably would feel a little bit of heat as those friction bonds between that rocket and that tube broke. There probably was a little heat that was generated. Probably not enough for us, I can tell you, not enough for me to feel with my bare hands, but if you had the right instruments, you could probably feel it. Probably feel some heat that happened between the tube and this tube as well. So, friction. And friction is something that, like I said, we're all kind of familiar with. We all sort of intuitively know, even if we don't know how to talk about it necessarily in like super duper sciencey terms. But these are forces that are around us all the time that we sort of understand. All right, another experiment for you. Perfect. We have 3 blocks. One with some sandpaper on the bottom, one with some push pins pushed into it, and then one that's just a plain old wooden block. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 3 blocks, I'm going to lay them flat on here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start tilting this up. And at some point, there's going to be a sliding that happens. These blocks are going to start sliding down the board. And what I want you to do is predict what order they're going to start sliding in. So I have sandpaper, push pins, wood. So maybe we'll do this by a vote. Who thinks that the sandpaper one is going to start sliding first? Who here thinks that the pushpin one is going to start sliding first? A couple hands out there. Who thinks that the plain wood one is going to start sliding first? Unanimous support for the pushpin one. Let's go the other way. Which one do we think is going to start sliding last? Do we think the sandpaper is going to start sliding last? Do we think the pushpins are going to start sliding last? Do we think the wood's going to start sliding last? Again, we seem to have a consensus happening here where people think pushpins are going to go first, so that's the one in the middle. We think the sandpaper is going to go last. So, seems like there's something intuitive happening here, even if we're not necessarily thinking about this in the context of, like we said, the most sciencey of terms. We look at this and we have some level of understanding, or at least we think we do, of how this is supposed to work. So I'm going to start tilting here. Push pins first. Sandpaper actually second, and wood. So, we're doing a scientific experiment here. Could be multiple variables. One thing we could check is where we put all of our things. So, key to good experiment design, run multiple trials, account for all your variables. I judge the science fair every year, and one of my favorite things I love seeing is people running multiple trials. So we want to make sure we run multiple trials. So we have one trial where push pins in middle went first, followed by sandpaper on my left, followed by wood block on my right. So let's try that. We're swapping the one, so the sandpaper has the fast lane this time, as far as we know. Still push pins. Now the wood block. Now the sandpaper. So, it's not the lane that's the difference there. I guess the lane did make some difference because we changed it and stuff changed. So let's try it one more time. Let's swap a couple of these around. So now the wood block has the middle lane there, and the sandpaper's on my right. My left is the pins. One more time. Still the wood block, or still the push pins, I mean. A little bit of a jiggle from the plain wood block. There we go, and then the sandpaper. So 2 out of 3 trials, the sandpaper went last, which goes with our hypothesis that we started out at the front. Sandpaper would be last, push pins would be first. Like I said, there was something that we were sort of intuiting there, seemingly, that we were all picking up on, where we look at this and we see you know, these nice metal push pins here. We say, ooh, that's smooth, right? Smooth stuff slides pretty easy. We look at the sandpaper, we say, oh, that's probably pretty rough. Rough stuff usually doesn't slide very easily. And when we use terms like smooth or rough or bumpy or slippery or whatever, really what we're talking about is how much friction that happens with this thing. And so, like I said, we don't always think about it in those terms because we use all these different adjectives to describe these things, but we're talking about scientific concepts when we talk about that stuff. Stuff that is like actionable and observable in nature. Right. Let's try another fun little experiment here. What I have here is a device that is basically a spring-loaded little piston here. What I can do is I can push this, I can slot it into place, then I can flick that, and there's a big spring in there that makes it shoot that way. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple metal balls on it. I have one ball that sort of hooks up to this part right here. I have one ball that's going to sit right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this, and then this ball is going to drop straight down. That ball is going to fling off that way. And from everything we've seen, we can expect that eventually these balls are going to hit the ground. What I care about is which one of these balls is going to hit the ground first. So, like I said, one's going to go straight down, one's going to go that way, and eventually hit the floor. I'll give you a little hint on there. They are both going to hit the floor. It's a matter of which one is going to happen first. So, again, we'll put it out to the crowd here. Who here thinks that the ball that's going to fall straight down is going to hit the ground first? Ooh, a little more contention in the audience this time. Who here thinks that the one that's going to shoot off to the side is going to hit the ground first? Who here thinks that they're both going to hit at the same time? Who here thinks that neither of them are going to hit the ground? See that one? All right, let's try it. And a lot of times I find that the best way to observe this one is by listening rather than trying to watch it, because one of them's going to be over there and one of them's going to be right here. It's hard to look at both of them at the same time. Let's listen. All right, one more time. Let's listen very closely. That one's fun because it's hitting that table leg. And so, they hit it about the same time. In a perfect version of this experiment with no inefficiencies, it would hit at the same time if everything was exactly balanced exactly correctly, because it turns out the horizontal momentum that this one is getting doesn't really affect the vertical momentum at all. You could do this with like a rifle and the bullet still hits the ground at the same time as long as we shoot it level. It just travels a lot further before it does it. And so when I ask this question to like a group of students, you know, I get a lot of answers. I get a lot of people that'll say this one's going to hit the ground first because it doesn't have to travel as far. I get some that say this one's going to hit the ground first because it's getting that little extra injection of energy from the piston behind it. But the truth is, like I said, this energy pushing it that way doesn't affect how fast gravity is pulling it that way. And so, like I said, you can do this do it at the same time, and they fall at the same time. Let's try something a little different here. So those two balls that I had before were about the same mass. Now I have two balls where this one is pretty substantially bigger. This one doesn't really work in this thing, and the bigger ball doesn't really fit on my thing very well. So I'm just going to try and drop these ones. But now we have a different question is, I have a heavy ball and a lighter ball. I'm going to try and drop them at the same time. And now what do we think? Do we think there's going to be anything changes? Or is it still going to be the same? Are they still going to hit at the same time? Who thinks that they're still going to hit at the same time? Who thinks that the heavy ball is going to hit the ground first? Who thinks that the light ball is going to hit the ground first? All right. Still at the same time. Or close to it, as close to it as my ability to hold two things level and release them at the same time allows for, at least. And so, yeah, the mass of an object doesn't affect how hard gravity pulls on it. Gravity pulls on everything at the same rate. But we can actually kind of play with this a little bit. Let's take my big heavy ball, and let's take my picture of Isaac Newton, and let's try and drop those at the same time. Now do we think they're still going to fall at the same rate? Everything we've dropped so far has hit the ground at the same time. Do we think that's going to hold true still with a different object? We've been working exclusively with metal balls to this point. So who thinks they're still going to hit at the same time? Got one believer. Who here thinks that the ball's going to hit first? A few others. Who here thinks the paper's going to hit first? Nobody believes in Sir Isaac Newton. Alright, let's try it. Yeah. And you're right. Despite everything that we've observed so far, the metal ball does hit first. Again, I can show you all this stuff, but we still like intuitively understand this. These are properties that we're observing in the world around us all the time. And so why does that happen? Why does it take so much longer for the piece of paper to hit the ground than the metal ball? Well, remember when we were waving our hands around and feeling all that stuff in the air? Turns out, this bumps into a lot more of that stuff than this does on its way down.
Is that air resistance?
And so as a result of, yeah, the air resistance, you know, gravity's still pulling on this at the same rate, but it has a lot more air resistance to overcome on its way down. It's bumping into a lot more stuff, and so it slows it down. Yeah.
Is like the surface of the paper, does that like affect it because there's more like air resistance, so it's like a more surface area?
Yeah, exactly. It's all about, you know, surface area versus mass, basically, is what it ends up being. And so, I mean, we could do this, try and, you know, put our ball on top of our paper and try and drop it, and our paper falls a lot faster. But because this thing is really wide and light and broad, it, you know, bumps into a lot of stuff. It gets more affected by the stuff that it bumps into, and it's bumping into a lot more stuff. And so we could run this same experiment. We could do it on the moon. And what would that change? Do we think we would get the same result on the moon, or would something be different on the moon?
It goes slower.
They would fall slower on the moon because the moon, gravity pulls a lot less strongly on the moon. So yeah, they would fall slower, but would they still hit at the same time? Or would they hit at different times? Did they still hit at different times, or would they hit at the same time? What do you think?
Different times?
No, they would actually hit at pretty much the same time. Probably technically they would hit at a different time because like there's not no air on the moon. But when you take away the air, if you do this in a vacuum, what we would call it, a vacuum is a space that has genuinely nothing in it as far as like the stuff that's in air. These do hit at the same time. And so you do this on the moon, they're going to fall a lot slower, but they're going to hit at the same time on the moon, or except much closer to the same time, at the very least. Alright, let's go second law of motion. Second law of motion, you usually see her written out as just like a math equation. F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. And sort of a really basic, easy way to think about that one is bigger objects, it takes more force to move them, and when they are moving, they generate more force, assuming they're moving at the same speed. Think about it in the context of, if I'm sprinting at you as fast as I can, and I run into you, you know, I don't know how fast I can sprint, call it, I don't know, 10, 12 miles an hour or whatever, and I run into you, it's gonna be uncomfortable, but you're probably fine. If a truck hits you at that speed, you're probably dead, because the truck is much bigger, much more mass, and so it hitting you at that speed generates a lot more force than I do. And so, there's a couple things you can flip all these things around once you know basic algebra. The fact that it's written as a math equation, because they apply the algebra to it, means you can move all those things around. So, can I get a volunteer from the crowd? Maybe this ends up being Angela if nobody else wants to do it. But I have here on the floor 2 skateboards and a rope. And I'm going to have my assistant Angela, who's been behind the camera this whole time. Why don't you just take a seat on this skateboard here when she's done futzing with the camera. So just sit kind of crisscross applesauce on that skateboard and face towards me without anything dragging on the ground or anything. Feet up. There you go. So we have Angela sitting on one skateboard with one end of the rope. You can pick up that end of the rope. I'm going to sit on the other side of the skateboard with the other end of the rope. And so, in a little bit here, what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to start reeling in the slack on this rope, and eventually I'm going to start pulling on Angela. Angela's going to hold on to her end. I'm going to start pulling. And again, I want to hear some hypotheses here of what do we think is going to happen. When I pull on the rope, do we think that Angela will move? Yeah. Do we think that only Angela will move? So let's do it this way. When I pull on the rope, hands up if you think only Angela will move. Hands up if you think we'll both move. Hands up if you think... Yeah, I'm going to pick my feet up when we go. Hands up if we think that just me will move.
Angela will move first.
Angela's going to move first? All right, let's try it. So I'm going to pick my feet up, take my seat. Like I said, I'm just gonna start reeling this in, and somebody's gonna move. But who's it gonna be? How many of us will it be? Who knows? Just Angela. Alright, but again, just like with our other experiment, let's test for some other variables. So in that context, I was the one who was pulling. Why don't you try pulling now, Angela? You reel yours in and I'll just hold. Still just Angela. And so, we think about this in the context of force equals mass times acceleration. Ooh, we got one more variable actually to test. Switch skateboards. Maybe I've got a trick skateboard or a bad skateboard. When we think about this in the context equals force equals mass times acceleration, so we can flip it around a little bit and talk about it in the context of how much force does it take to move an object of a certain mass. And so, why don't you reel your end in? Nothing changing. It's not the skateboards. And again, just for completionism's sake, you hold your end, I'm going to start reeling now. Still just Angela. And so what's that tell us about me and Angela? What does that mean? The fact that every time we pull on this rope, no matter who's pulling from which end, Angela's the one who moves. What's that mean?
Weight causes resistance.
What was that?
Your weight causes the resistance.
Yeah, exactly. Basically what we're learning here is I'm heavier than Angela is. Because I'm heavier, it takes more force to move me. So when you enter in a situation like this, the force is being applied to both of us equally. Like the rope, the tension on the rope is being equally distributed here between the two of us. But because I have more mass than Angela does, she starts moving before I do. So we could swap this out, and if we had people who were pretty close to the same mass, actually, do you want to try stepping up here into my spot?
Sure.
This how we were doing there. What was your name? Annalise, perfect. And so Annalise, why don't you start reeling in your rope? Just reel it nice and gentle. Angela's gonna keep holding on to it. And now we are seeing a little bit of movement on them, right? That Annalise is still moving more than Angela is, but Angela's moving a little bit. So we're getting somewhere closer to the same mass here, is what that means. And so if we had two objects that were the same mass, or very close to the same mass, they would both move at the same time and close to the same amount. So the closer we get to two objects of the same mass, the more similar amount of energy it's going to take to move them. And so why don't you reel yours in again for completionism's sake, and Annalise, you just hold. And so Angela is a bit more massive than Annalise is, but again, we're getting closer. Good job, guys. Round of applause for Annalise. I guess
So what if you were to like sit on it and I put my feet out and try to pull you? Like that would change it, right?
Oh yeah.
Because like
I mean, we can try that. So yeah, this is if you have your feet down and you try and pull me with your feet braced. Yeah, you're gonna move me because. And now it takes a lot more. There's a big ol' real strong chunk of friction here that has to be overcome, and that friction, your weight and that friction is functionally more mass than what I am alone on the skateboard. If we were to, and we could even change that, I bet if we were to, there's probably a slippery enough surface we could put on the bottom of your shoes where even with your feet down, it would still play. Like, I don't know, if we did a small enough person and put them in socks, maybe maybe we could still do it even with the feet down, but I don't think we're gonna get there today. All right, force equals mass times acceleration, pretty easy. All right, yeah. Newton's last law of motion, the third law, is called, you'll hear it phrased as every action has equal and opposite reaction. If I slap a table, it slaps me back. My hand hurts. If the table could feel pain, its surface would also be hurting. When you do a high five and both your hands hurt, there you go. And so lots of stuff relies on this. And so what I have here is called an Aeroprop. It's a thing that we sell in the gift shop. They're $2 if you're interested. And so the Aeroprop obviously is very reminiscent of something that we're familiar with, again, a helicopter. And how do helicopters work? What does a helicopter do? It flies. But how's a helicopter fly? Yeah. So it moves air around by spinning its prop on the top. And somehow or another, by spinning that blade around on the top, it makes a thing that is very big and heavy get up off the air and fly around. Simple enough. And this relies on the same physics and works a very similar way. So if I spin this, it'll fly. So let's do it. Try it again. We're not flying. What's wrong with our equation?
No base.
No base. We need a weight on the bottom to like stabilize it, we think. Could be. I'll tell you, they work. This would be a terrible toy to sell in the gift shop if you need to do it, like attach stuff to it for it to work.
Someone mentioned you have to like spin it a certain way.
You have to spin it a certain way. And you're right, I was spinning it the wrong way. That's the secret. So if I spin it the direction, it works fine. And so, like I said, it has to spin a specific direction. If you look really closely at our prop here, you can see those blades aren't as flat, they're actually at an angle. And so what I was doing the first time is I was spinning it this direction. And so when I spin it this direction, what happens is the air hits on this side of the prop, and because it is angled downward, it pushes the air upwards. And if I'm pushing something upwards, Newton's third law of motion, every action has an equal opposite reaction. If I'm pushing something up, where am I getting pushed? Down. So I twist it this way, it flies, it just flies down. Whereas if I spin it this way, all of a sudden now the air is hitting at the high point, the air gets pushed down, and if air is getting pushed down, my prop gets pushed up. Pretty simple, pretty easy, and well illustrated with, like I said, just a simple little toy like this, equal and opposite reactions. And let's see, what else do I have in that sort of general vicinity? Actually, we're probably pretty close to time now that I think about it. This was only supposed to be like a 20-ish minute show, and I've probably gone half an hour.
38.
All right, perfect. So, does anybody have any questions? Anyone want to see anything again or try out any of my little experiments? Otherwise, I'm going to sign off on the stream over here so that I can keep hanging out for a little while if you guys want to check some of this stuff out. But otherwise, thank you guys on Twitch and YouTube for watching. Facebook, potentially. I think we stream on there too still. We said we're doing these shows Saturday and Sundays. We're probably not going to stream all of them. I set this one up for a stream because I wasn't sure if I was going to have an in-person audience, but lo and behold, they showed up for me. So thank you guys. And for you guys on Twitch, well, I'll see you when I see you. I guess we don't have set times for this, but we'll probably be starting to get into it pretty soon here.